Blog Talk Radio.
Good day to all. Thank you for tuning in to the Uvisualeyes show, where you will experience the top, most powerful, insightful, and talented teachers, speakers, and writers on inner wisdom, personal evolution, and love. This is your host and life transformation coach, Michelle Kraft. Welcome. If you missed the last show featuring Rich Gurman on incorporating meditation in your life, you will find the show in the archives and can listen at your leisure. In addition, tune in for the informative interview with Sherry Gaba on her book, The Law of Sobriety, on June 28, 12 o'clock Central Standard Time. The Uvisualeyes show has grown in leaps and bounds over the last year. I started broadcasting from a little village in Germany just over a year ago, and now we come to you live from Paris, France. I remember struggling to decide just exactly what the focus of the Uvisualeyes show would be. I am a student of the law of attraction, personal and spiritual growth, and I use visualizing techniques to help me manifest the life experience I desire, as well as teach others to do the same. I did not know exactly how it would all go, but the show has morphed into a spiritual journey for both my listeners and, I humbly say, for myself. Thank you. I want you to listen for a moment to a piece of music. To play that music for you, and we'll talk about that later. I stumbled across an announcement in early February on my way to my brother's funeral in Switzerland of a book soon to hit the shelves. I glanced over the description and the photo on the cover, and overwhelmed with my grief at hand and surely the devastating story, I avoided the calling of this book. This frightening tale of a little boy's almost unspeakable, horrific accident, a parent's tremendous pain, and a young man's insistent climb to humility and spirituality. A few months after my brother's death, I came across this book again. I was still very vulnerable, my heart uncovered, wide open, and the story still frightened me. I feared that my unsheathed heart would be too accessible and tender to handle such an intense lesson. But it seems it may have been the perfect time. I was afraid to read The Gift of Fire. There were a few reasons. Being a student and a believer of the law of attraction, I feared activating negative thoughts. This is pretty common in new students. I'm an advocate of not watching the news for this reason. Furthermore, I know that what we focus on expands, and I worried that Dan Caro's story would perhaps devastate me more than uplift me. It is because I still hung on to beliefs that there is some evil to be avoided. As we all know, the haunting images of a horrific story can stick with us long after the reporting, and can prove to be difficult to purge from our minds and bodies. I worried that this would be the case. I had not trusted just how much I had grown. I finally took a deep breath, and I trusted in the universe's direction for me, and I booked Dan Caro to be on the Uvisualeyes show. Second step, I had to read the book. So finally, on a plane from Paris to Chicago, I cracked open his book. In the first couple chapters of The Gift of Fire on the plane, I sobbed, collecting worried stares from the passengers, over the surely devastating experience of 2-year-old Dan Caro, burned alive, and his parents' broken hearts. As a mother, I know that Dan's mother's pain was just as worse, or just as horrendous as Dan's, or worse. I speak of this from experience. When I got the news of my missing daughter after the bombing of the USS Cole, watching reports of sailors trapped beneath a sinking ship, before I knew if my daughter had survived the explosion, my heart hurt beyond description. But I do not want to dwell too long in the brief moment of the accidents. I say brief because in comparison to the lesson and the growth we have ahead of ourselves, it is a flicker in time. What happened in the years to come after Dan Caro was burned beyond recognition is astounding, humbling, and intensely inspiring, and has become my own gift. As a mother, I sobbed. As a spiritualist, I cheered. Wayne Dyer writes in the foreword of The Gift of Fire, "Nothing is impossible to the determined soul." And I was deeply and profoundly moved by his unwillingness to make excuses for anything in his life. And this, my listeners, is what I want to focus on today. At the age of 2, in the early 80s, Dan Caro was, when gasoline was ignited in his family garage, sustained third-degree burns over 70% of his little body. When the local New Orleans Charity Hospital did all they could for this little boy near death, the Shriners Hospital stepped in and saved Dan Caro's life. He would undergo many reconstructive surgeries and other treatments throughout his childhood. Dan lost his right hand and most of his left hand and is severely scarred. In the mid-1980s, reconstructive surgery that would give Dan the use of a movable thumb was performed on his left hand. Since then, Dan has been living life to the fullest in the face of his adversity. His relentless attitude and resiliency would consistently prove that nothing is impossible, including his lifelong dream of becoming a musician. Dan, at the age of 12, began drumming in spite of his loss of fingers. Now, I wanted to explain more there, but I think I'd really rather let him do that in just a moment. He did become a musician. I feel deeply blessed that he is here with us today. Welcome to the Uvisualeyes show, Dan.
Thank you, Michelle. It's an honor. Much appreciated.
Wow, I can't believe you're here, Dan. I feel the grace of your presence already. Please,
thank you so much.
Tell us about that music. That's where I'd really like to begin, and then we'll go into a little bit more of your story, and then, of course, your elevation from it. But please tell us about that piece of music we just heard.
Well, that piece that you heard was a tune written and composed by, written and performed originally by the Miles Davis Quintet. I decided to put out an album under my own name, self-titled album, called No Hand Dan Compilation, Volume 1. And I recorded that piece of music just because it sort of speaks to my heart. That song is entitled 7 Steps to Heaven. And it's just an uplifting piece to me. And I felt that it would represent an attitude and set the tone for the record that I wanted to put out. So
it's absolutely amazing. My husband and I were listening to it last night, jamming all over the living room. It was a lot of fun. We really enjoyed it. I would like you to, because people may not have read your book, and I'm sure there are some listening who have, but for those who haven't heard your story or read the book, I'd like you to fill us in a little bit more on your story before we jump right into where you're at, your music, and where you're headed. So if you could do that. I stopped at age 12. You began drumming in spite of the loss of your fingers. Why don't you begin there? How did that happen?
Well, I come from New Orleans, and New Orleans is known for two things, really. Well, three things: partying, music, and food. And the music in New Orleans is so abundant. I mean, literally, you can walk outside in any neighborhood and hear music through the air. you hear brass bands, and we have Mardi Gras in New Orleans every February, or actually Mardi Gras Day is the day before Ash Wednesday. It's a Catholic city, so we follow the Catholic holidays, and it's just a gigantic celebration. And you hear bands and music, and it's just a celebration of life is really what it is. And growing up with that experience, unique to New Orleans and very few other places in the world, really, to that magnitude, was a real joy and a real treat for me. And I wanted to contribute to that, that culture, that party. And fortunately,
be part of it.
right. Fortunately, almost everyone in my family were musicians already. So, I mean, as far back as my grandparents on both of my parents' side, it just seemed natural for me to follow in their footsteps. And they played brass instruments. Everybody played trumpet, which is a big instrument in New Orleans. But unfortunately, because of the burns and the scar tissue and the fact that I had to have my lips reconstructed because they actually burned off in the fire, it was very difficult for me to form the embouchure on the lips to blow through a trumpet mouthpiece. Right. And I had a very, very strong curiosity for rhythm. I mean, I was always, from very young, trying to emulate rhythms that I would hear anywhere. And my father kind of, realized that my rhythm was kind of a natural thing. And then he suggested, why don't you play drums? And we went to a pawn shop one Saturday morning, picked up some drumsticks and a snare drum, and my journey began right after, or right when I was 12. And I had absolutely no idea how I was going to do this. As you said in your introduction, I lost my right hand, and then on my left hand I have a reconstructed thumb. And with that thumb, I'm able to grip, now at that time, very loosely, was able to grip the drumstick. And if I hit the drum, I didn't have as much strength as was needed to hold the drumstick for too long, so I'd usually hit the stick and it would hit the drum head and the stick would go flying out. And but at least I could hit it once. And that's all that it took to convince me that I would be able to play. And it would just take a lifetime of dedication to be able to hold the stick for any duration of time. But on the right hand, rather, I had a major challenge because I didn't have the capability of gripping with that thumb. So I had to use some kind of external device, which I came up with over about a month's time through some major trial and error. One of the failed attempts was super glue, which is not healthy. And then, some other things like duct tape just fails miserably and hurt very bad. But I eventually stumbled on the idea of an elastic band, cushiony elastic band, like a sweat wristband, a tennis wristband. Yeah. And then I put some rubber bands around that, and I was able to hold the stick. And, I just devoted my life to it, and I realized, it's going to take a long time, a lot of discipline, a lot of dedication, but that's what I wanted to do. I felt called into playing music. It was sort of something that I've felt since birth, I think, and I was going to do whatever it takes to get it done.
A tremendous determination, that's for sure. but your love for music, I could really feel it and read it. When I was reading the book, just how much you loved the music and the drumming, and becoming a musician was the top priority. Besides the determination to tie your shoe, why don't you talk to us about that one?
Well, that's sort of what blew the doors open on my universe. When I was 5 years old, just kind of entering kindergarten, after all of the ridicule settled, and I settled into the kindergarten class as sort of an equal to them, which took a tremendous amount of patience and humility. I realized that everyone was independent, for the most part, at that age. everybody could handle or take care of themselves as far as brushing their teeth, combing their hair, tying their shoes, and buttoning their shirts and all this stuff. Now, everybody was able-bodied in the sense that they all had fingers and their full hands. So I didn't. I was already set back a little bit. But I didn't. My whole life at that time was devoted to being an equal in the eyes of my peers, in the eyes of the world. I wanted to be seen as equal, not as inferior in any way, not as someone who should be pitied or given extra time or an extra shot. I wanted the same chances, the same shot as everybody else at the same time. And in order to do that, I would have to raise the bar for myself. And the one thing at that time that I was unable to do on my own was tie my shoes. And this was a tremendous journey and a tremendous lesson that would teach me, really, that anything is possible. I mean, anything, no matter what. Because this is what I say on stage. Go and cut your hands off and then tie your shoes. See how difficult that's going to be. I mean, that's really what you're working with. Because when I was 5, that surgery that you talked about in your introduction where the doctors gave me the use of a movable thumb had just happened. And when you don't have something and all of a sudden they throw something on you, like imagine having another arm put on your body. I mean, it's just going to be dead. You're not going to be able to use it until you develop the muscle tone and all that. So this thumb actually was a hindrance initially. And I had to fight through that and develop that muscle strength and that dexterity in order to grip the shoelace. And that was a journey that took me 7 years to achieve. And when I was 12 years old, just before I started playing drums, I finally was able to tie my shoes for the very first time on my own. And it was because it took that long for me to develop the strength to grip the laces tight enough and to pull the knot tight. I had always had to ask for help, and that was very discouraging for me for those 7 years. But I was still very determined to one day do it. And just something inside of me said, it will be done, but you've got to be tested to the max in order to see if you're ready, And then as soon as you're ready, the doors open, the universe reveals itself as just completely present for you, and everything just seems to work. And that's exactly how I felt. I felt absolutely liberated in that moment. And when I tied my shoes, it was my greatest achievement to date, actually.